side, industry relations, organizing a showcase festival, like stages at showcase festivals, for instance. And then the other half of the time I spend working with our top priority artists in Europe, helping them with release strategy and kind of how they can better monetize their music and make more money at the end of the day and run their careers as indie artists.
Okay, well, you're the perfect person to have on this discussion. Thank you very much for joining us. Adam, tell us a bit about yourself and what you do day to day and how you got to this point, please.
Absolutely. So I was born and raised just outside Detroit, Michigan. Always had a very strong passion for music, played guitar in a ton of different pop punk bands growing up. Knew I was never going to be a rock star though. So I went to University of Michigan where I studied physics, thought I was going to be a rocket scientist for a bit and worked in a lab. And after about a year of that, decided this is too isolating. I like people and I want to have a more macroeconomic impact. Mm-hmm. So went into finance, interned at Goldman Sachs for a little bit, then went to Ernst & Young full-time and did digital transformations for big financial services clients. And about 3 years ago, had the opportunity to move out to Los Angeles to help them build out their innovation practice. So we'd set up digital incubators and accelerators for large corporate clients. And then during that time period, made a bunch of friends in the music industry and saw how it continuously shifted from, in verticals like distribution, has shifted from a very physical to then digital downloads to now streaming. We've seen promotion shift from radio and physical then to now social media being a major driver. And I saw that financing really hadn't changed. So I thought I could take my passion, combine it with my domain expertise and build something that allows musicians to finance their projects in new ways with their fans allowed to invest into those projects for a piece of their future royalty revenue.
That's amazing. Again, you're the perfect person to have on this panel. And I find it interesting how you've managed to combine, kind of investment banking and finance and rock and roll. It's got to be done somehow, and you're the man for the job. Great to have you with us, Adam. John, tell us a little bit about your life in music, because it has been a life in music, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has for a bit, and there's threads throughout all of this as well. I was born and raised a couple 100 miles south of where Adam is from, in an industrial town called Fort Wayne, Indiana, and ultimately lived in Los Angeles for a while, but lived for a long time in New York. And in New York, I worked in the club scene in the late 80s, mid to late 80s, doing sound at some of the mega clubs like Limelight and The World, and then some of the smaller places like CBGB's. Had a band that played around New York a lot, and then went on to start working in sort of the avant-garde world at a place called The Kitchen, which is a place where people like Philip Glass and Laurie Anderson got their start. And I worked with them as they were board members of the organization. And then went into a bit of technology, working for one of the first .com startups way back in the 90s. That took me to right next to Norway, Sweden, where I was working doing mobile internet development for Ericsson, the Swedish telecoms company. Lived there for quite a while, and then got hired by the BBC in Scotland, where I ended up meeting you, Vic, and we both...
Absolutely, yeah.
Scotland.
We had coffee in the canteen on many occasions.
Exactly, and discussed music. And I continue to do music throughout all of this. I released music under the name Cinema Volta. Actually, a lot of my stuff has been released by CD Baby from actually the early 2000s. So been doing that and performing around, although not performing lately during lockdown, but considering things in relation to live streams and how a musician can exist, in a remote collaboration. Currently in the process of working on a set of songs, actually using Delic as the collaboration tool with a musical partner of mine, David Azark, who is the former DJ at the Mud Club in New York. And that's what brought me to Delic, is the concept of how to facilitate the creation of new music,
Well,
because
this is it. And if people have just joined us, maybe they haven't seen any of the previous Delic sessions, or they've just, jumped in on Facebook or YouTube just to have a quick look at this. Give us a quick, in a nutshell, describe what, I know I gave a couple of lines at the beginning, but give us a little description of what Delic is and what it plans to do going forward.
well, what Delic does is it manages the workflow for you. So you can set up tasks and make comments and communicate with the people you're collaborating with. It starts from the idea, even before the song exists. There's the idea pane on Delic, which is a bit like a mood board, where you can share videos and audio files and things like that to get a direction of how you want to work with the collaboration. Then with the people that you're working with, it'll manage all your files. You upload the files and it'll record those elements. So it also tracks the attribution throughout the entire process. Basically, it does all the stuff that musicians don't like to do and aren't very good at. Actually, what most human beings aren't very good at, but what machines are pretty good at. And we're just getting all of that busy work out of the way so people can just get straight into the business of being creative.
Cool. Okay, well, let's bash on with our discussion today. I'm going to start with a quote which we've been banding around on the Delic newsletter and so on, from Tim Westergren, ex-CEO at Pandora. He has said, let me pull it up here, digital music has been one colossal failure in changing the economy of musicians themselves. It looks a lot like it did 40 years ago, where the money goes to a few and the rest are fighting for crumbs. The web and social networks caused a rush of artists to invest time, effort, and money to build fan bases in this world of followers, streams, and likes, with the idea that now we have this audience, we can build our lives in this space. However, there's a lack of efficiency between a fan who wants to give something to an artist to explain their love for what they're doing and how the artists are receiving that. Right now, all these platforms are wildly inefficient ways for artists to make money. Your music is available all the time and you don't make any money. And that's why COVID has been even more devastating. Live is the only place where you can get paid directly. So making money from music wasn't sustainable pre-COVID. So today, Delic session number 6 asks, how do musicians and music creators make money from their music? Let's just quickly talk about the old school model. Record deals, publishing deals, 360 deals. Adam, have you had any experience? I mean, maybe not personally, but indirectly. Have you seen any of that world before this new sort of digital dawn, as it were?
So I've had a little bit of experience with it, where I've had a lot of friends who have had record deals, some 360 deals, some more traditional pub deals. And what I've seen is it doesn't really take artists into account, where I think something that's important is the world's starting to see artists more as startups, because artists are really just small companies that have this growth phase. And traditional label deals, think about artists, I think, more as IP assets that can be bought, sold, marketed, and promoted. So I think that we're actually seeing a major shift towards artists as startups with new tools, with all these digital distribution companies, with different types of social media promotion, with different types of financing alternatives. And that, I think, is going to drive us into a more equitable world, where I think a really important quote that Daniel Ek, the CEO of Spotify, said was, "Gone are the days of the top 40. It's now the top 43,000, where 90% of Spotify's plays now comes from 43,000 unique musicians, up from 30,000 just a year ago." So we're seeing this empowerment of independent musicians. And I think that's just going to be a really interesting trend to watch, that I think all three of our companies are really supporting.
Hen, do you think the old model, if you like, the deal with a bigger company, do you think that's kind of dead now?
I think there's a place for all kinds of deals in the music industry. I think it's what the digital world has allowed to happen is to democratize the process and lower the barrier to entry, right? And I think there's some artists that are very happy being entrepreneurs and wanting to be in control of their own careers and every aspect of their career. Fantastic. You know, that's the sort of artists that we work with on a day-to-day basis. But for some others, that isn't a model that fits. Some people literally just want to push over all the responsibility to a company and are willing to give up a high percentage of their income to effectively be handheld, for lack of a better phrase. And I think that's okay too. I think it's up to individual artists, and that's what's so exciting about the world that we're living in right now. And you know, building on from what Adam said, that was exactly the fact that, or this stat that I'd written down that Daniel X said as well. And I think, you know, if you look at the way that the independent sector is growing, both on a label level, but also DIY artists directly, I think last year it was like close to a 40% growth in revenues coming to DIY artists. And that's just a testament to how democratized the process is becoming. And I think artists are becoming more aware of their choices. They know what the potential pitfalls are with some of those bigger deals, but they also know that what the advantages are. But I think transparency has definitely become much more of a thing in the industry over the last 10 years, 20 years.
Yeah. Okay. And John, have you had any sort of dealings with the old world? I mean, as Delic pushes forward, and obviously you know a lot about how technology's moved in the last 20 odd years or so. What about that old kind of label deal idea?
Well, it's the world has changed so dramatically since then. Had any number of friends who had deals, good stories, bad stories, stories of, you know, managers disappearing with money, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But the huge difference between then and now is that back then it was just all based on a positive cash flow, and nobody really paid much attention to the unit accounting. You know, if the labels felt that the money coming back from the distributors was about the right amount of money, and the money coming in from the collection societies was about the right amount of money, and the artists were happy with the size of their advance because they never actually lived on the royalties until, you know, until the world of, you know, people who had 20, 30-year careers, which was unusual up until maybe the 80s. As long as that money was flowing, it was okay. And Napster destroyed that. Napster just completely broke that chain. And then we had to move into the purely transactional world, particularly now in streaming. And all of a sudden, metadata became really important. And all of a sudden, it was like, oh my God, we don't know who owns anything.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think I sold that, but I don't know. And I've got this here. And well, is that song this other song, or is it a different one? And, you know, there have been startups that have come along trying to solve this, saying, oh, we'll apply artificial intelligence. Just send us all your paperwork, all your contracts. We'll put the computers on it and we'll figure it all out. And they were very surprised to get the response back from the labels and the managers and the artists who said, contracts?
Data? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Some napkins and envelopes with some scribbles on them. Will this help?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's completely blasted. So we're still, you know, in limbo right now. Things, you know, dust has not settled yet from what happened 20 years ago in Napster.
There are probably quite a few people from the sort of, if you like, old school music industry who are terrified of what's going on right now. I mean, I can only imagine. I mean, apart from anything else, looking for the contracts. Adam, you talked about artists almost being startups, if you like. Here's another quote. Artists are small entrepreneur businesses. They need 4 or 5 income streams to get off the ground. That's from a Muse Media Independent Artists Pathfinding Through a Pandemic report made in September 2020, so only about a month or so ago. So let's get into it. How do musicians make money from their work? I assume they need a portfolio of work, 4 or 5 income streams. so let's start. We'll get on to sort of subscription models and all sorts of things, but physical sales. I mean, I still see a benefit in physical sales. I still see vinyl sales being high, and even though people keep saying the CD is dead, CD sales are still in their hundreds of thousands of millions and so on and so on. So let's talk briefly about the physical product. That still has value, doesn't it, Adam?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I saw a study from RAII last year that it had the physical is still about 50% of recorded music revenues worldwide. It's less in the US, but I think it's still very substantial. But then what's interesting, like you mentioned, is records are the only growth sector in physical. Everything else is going down year over year. But there's this resurgence because of Urban Outfitters, I think, selling record players, and then it being cool and trendy to actually use analog. Plus, the sound quality is frankly a lot better than on a Spotify or a streaming service. But in terms of your first question about what are the different monetization avenues, I think streaming, of course, is one, and we're seeing huge growth in that sector, where it's not paying enough right now for artists, but as the population and amount of paid users gets bigger, there's going to be a bigger pot of music to go around. In addition, I'm seeing things like people making more money off 1,000 subscribers on Twitch than they're making off a million followers on Spotify, which is pretty incredible to see.
And how is the money coming in via Twitch then? Is that they're having paid subscribers? These are people that will pay £1 a month or £10 a month or whatever the value that they've set to watch that artist's content whenever they put it up.
Where I think of Twitch as almost like a friend on demand, where these artists will, like Logic just inked a multi-million-dollar deal to, I can't remember if it's once a week, call it Monday at 7 p.m. He's online where you can ask him questions. He's playing video games with his subscribers. You can tip him and then get your question answered. And there's just a lot of really interesting stuff going on there where it also integrates with your merchandise store in a lot of ways. So you're cross-selling and selling more products and driving more revenue streams.
Okay, well, that's interesting. I mean, I've watched lots of Twitch sort of broadcasts, but I've not sort of thought about it quite from the artist's point of view. I suppose I haven't quite got to that point with my own band, to the point when we're trying to monetize, kind of pay-per-view streams and so on. But Twitch seems to be one of the leading platforms for that. But maybe just staying on physical sales for a while, because obviously, let's just say an artist uses Twitch, as you've just said, they integrate it with their merchandise stall, and their merchandise stall is selling vinyl. I mean, John, are you still someone that buys bits of vinyl or CD or whatever, and do you still see the impact it's having as an artist yourself?
I do, to a certain extent. I don't buy vinyl because I actually hate the sound quality.
Right.
I think you'll find most musicians do, but I do think there is something special about vinyl. The physical size of it is a haptic object is a pretty powerful thing, and I think it has something to do with about the size of the cover filling the field of vision. There was 2 years ago, interesting statistic that came out that was regarded, with a bit of irony and skepticism, but the fact that 50% of people who bought vinyl don't have a turntable. And I actually view that as a positive thing, because if you think about, whether you agree with it or not, we live in a capitalist society, and value is communicated through a transaction, and you need a physical object. So the people who have bought that vinyl are making a statement, and kind of a radical statement, that this represents that I believe this music has value. And I think that's a very powerful thing. I recently bought a CD from a friend of mine, the artist Scanner. He put out something, a CD out about midway through the first lockdown, and it was around, and it's not it's not going on the streaming services or anything like that. And he came out and he simply said, a huge amount of my income is just dried up. So I'm releasing this, and would you help support me by buying it? It wasn't a GoFundMe or something like that. He was saying, I am making this, product, and I'm selling it. And it did really well. It was a limited run, and it sold out. And I think it's not the majority of people, but it's enough people to provide a good income to people if you reach out to people in that way.
Well, I remember interviewing the techno duo, the Black Dog. I don't know if you're aware of them, sort of pioneers of techno. I mean, this was a few years ago, but they said that they could put out a sort of artifact, a piece of 10-inch vinyl with a carving on one side and a couple of tracks on the A side, let's say, and sell it for a reasonable price, but nothing outlandish, and have more money coming in from 500 or 1,000 copies of that than they would from however many downloads, and streaming hadn't really taken off to that point, but they basically just laughed at streaming at that point. Hen, you're obviously working with digital distribution, but I mean, there is strength in an artist and sort of value for an artist in doing a physical copy of whatever release, isn't there? And maybe perhaps doing a release which isn't, as John's just said, available on streaming platforms, right?
Yeah, no, completely. And I think when we talk about this, just building on what John said first, actually, in terms of that owning that physical product, it's a form of tribalism, right? We belong to something in a world where a lot of people feel really disconnected because of technology. So I think physical products are very important. But also when we talk about physical kind of, and the decline that so many people talk about, we're not necessarily taking into consideration some of the biggest music markets in the world. Germany, physical is still huge in Germany. It's almost 50% of recorded music revenue. In Japan, second biggest music market in the world, still massive. They have CD rental stores in Japan. And so I definitely think there's a value in it. I think in terms of, being a band, playing a gig and selling 3 vinyls, so you're able to buy a couple of beers at the end of the night for that purpose. But I've also recently worked with some really clever bands that have used it as more of a marketing strategy. So they've, for instance, decided they're really going to hammer a vinyl single, like a promotional plan around a vinyl single, and really push that out to all of their fans with the goal of charting. A band that wouldn't chart in a normal album chart or a single chart, but they were able to do so in a vinyl singles chart, and then they can put that on all the press releases that they're sending out to all the different publications, TV channels, editors, whatever it might be, saying, oh yeah, by the way, we were number 3 in the charts, brackets, vinyl single.
Yeah.
But, it's still it's a cool little promotional trick. And I think there's a lot of things we can definitely learn from a lot of the Asian markets in terms of how they build an artist career from a really early stage, and they focus on all these other revenue streams and not just necessarily.
Hen, you've disappeared there.
Oh.
Can you see? Is Hen still chatting to you guys, or
She's
frozen.
frozen.
she's frozen? I don't know if you can hear us, Hen. There'll be someone digging the street outside your flat and disconnected the internet or something. Anyway, let's move on. I think it depends on the artist, actually, with vinyl or physical sales. For example, a Scottish band that I'm friends with and I love, the Twilight Sad, they went top 20 with their album. Now, they're not a household name and they're not necessarily a top 20 band, and yet they went to, I think, number 16, number 17 in the UK album charts, purely, I think 80% of the sales that got them there were through vinyl. They had a lovely vinyl package, blue vinyl, kind of specialty, kind of limited editions and all this kind of stuff. And their fans are the sort of people that get behind a band, buy their t-shirts, buy their merch, buy their vinyl. Yes, they'll probably listen to them constantly on Spotify or another streaming platform, but they want that artifact. Now, perhaps if you're a teenage band and your fans are fellow teenagers and the physical artifact isn't quite as important as it is to someone in their 40s like me, as you can tell, I still adore the artifact and I've got tons of vinyl and so on and so on. But a teenage artist might not have that audience. So it's really up to the kind of artist you are. Right. I just wanted to touch on physical sales because I think in these kinds of discussions, go straight into digital and forget that you guys have said it, 50% of music sales are still physical, and people seem to forget that kind of stuff, and it's important to know. Adam, let's talk about streaming then. Artists hate the model, users love it. And there's another sort of statistic or whatever that I've seen recently. While much of the music industry is in survival mode, Universal Music Group are on course to earn $500 million more from streaming in 2020 than they did last year. How does an artist, everyone's streaming, everyone releases a piece of music now, is on multiple streaming platforms. How do you stand out?
That's a difficult question because Spotify has 40,000 new songs each day released. So it does take quite a bit to get through what I call the marzipan layer. Great to have you back, Hen.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay.
So,
2020.
Yeah. It's 2020. Adam, sorry, continue. We sort of wrapped up physical sales just for a bit, and now we're talking about streaming. So I'm just kind of asked the question: how does an artist, if everyone is uploading their music to streaming platforms, how do you stand out from the crowd? Adam, take it away, and then I'll come to you again, Hen.
So I think it's really, you almost need to build an online persona through different digital mediums like Instagram, TikTok, Triller, all of these different platforms that people can use as both monetization opportunities, but also for marketing. Because what I've seen artists become really successful with on TikTok or on Instagram is teasing small snippets of up and coming releases where you're building that anticipation. So when you do drop it on that day, you actually can go, you're already creating that artificial demand, as well as there's different distribution platforms. I'm sure that CD Baby does something similar to DistroKid where they'll give you a pre-save link, or they'll also basically, you click on a link, it automatically follows the artist for you. And that's going to be really big because then you're showing up in your New Music Fridays and lots of other algorithm playlists.
Right. But the thing is, everyone wants to get on these playlists. Hen, talk us through a little bit of the behind the scenes magic. What's going on? Because as Adam just said, what was it? The statistic, 43,000 songs are being uploaded to streaming platforms every day, or maybe that's just to Spotify every day.
No, so most of us deliver to the same amount of platforms, right? We deliver to over 150 digital platforms. Same with the majority of our competitors, and it is difficult standing out from the rest of the crowd. I think a lot of those 43,000 tracks a day end up in a dark corner of Spotify of music that never gets heard, and I think that's worth noting. But as an artist, I think there's a lot of prep and admin stuff. Unfortunately, I know that's not what an artist wants to hear. But there's a lot of prep and admin stuff that you need to do in advance to make sure that you get the best possible opportunity to be heard. Spotify, take Spotify as an example. They're very good at building tools internally that artists can interact with. So they have a pitching tool, for instance. So you, as an artist, the track will appear over a week in advance in your Spotify for Artists, and you need to pitch at least a week out, but ideally more. And that allows for your music to end up in your fans Discover Weekly and Release Radar. And those are the two super key playlists, because they're the algorithmically generated ones that a lot of people interact with, and they have high save rates, low skip rates, and people generally tend to interact more with them. I know that every artist wants to end up on New Music Friday. Unfortunately, the reality is that that's a playlist with 10,000 different genres chucked into one. So as most music fans are not into listening to Miley Cyrus and black metal at the same time, you know, so people
John is.
Miley's new album is black metal. Okay.
Sorry, Hen. Sorry.
No, that's all right. But I think, you know, making sure that you have, as an artist, making sure that you have claimed all your different streaming profiles and you've got up-to-date pictures and biographies and all these things. It sounds really simple, but if an editor if an editor receives a pitch for your music and your bio is clearly from 6 years ago, they go, you haven't bothered, why should I bother? So making sure that you do all that admin work in advance, and also interact with your local curators. You don't necessarily need to shoot for the star straight away. Find all these playlist curators that have playlists that are listened to by 1,000 people a month rather than 100,000. That might fit better with your genre. Because again, then you're going to see that people interact more actively with it, which is just going to help you in the long run as you keep dropping music.
So it's the classic thing of try and build a local scene in a way. You know, it's always been that way. Get a local following when you're gigging. You have to kind of apply the same logic to streaming and socials, right? You need to start building up a local buzz. Try and get people in your vicinity adding you to their playlists. That's
your local scene doesn't necessarily always have to be a geographical scene. It can be a tribal scene. So, you know, if you play rock that's kind of on the heavier side, Latin America is a perfect region for you. Trying to find some curators in Latin America that might be willing to feature some international music. So I think education, just learning about your scene and discovering more and more.
And you know, in terms of doing research into these things, just spend a day or two going through various different streaming platforms and sort of literally searching for, you know, playlist curators in certain kinds of scenes, I take it. Are there any clever sort of hack ways that you can sort of find out more about things?
I mean, the beautiful thing about social media is that everybody puts the information online, right? So most private curators, you'll be able to find them on Twitter or Instagram, and you can drop them an email directly. In terms of finding playlists, if you go on Spotify and you just search for rock and you go into the playlist section, you'll clearly see which ones are from Spotify and which ones are not. Click on them and see if you think that your music fits. But I think, you know, the curators on the receiving end of your potential pitch or your email or message, whatever it might be, you need to appreciate them, right? Make them understand that you know what their playlist is about, what kind of music they feature. Because again, if you come in with like super poppy music into metal curator, they're probably going to go, eh.
Yeah. John, what's your experience been like from an artist's point of view in terms of streaming? Have you managed to make any money or of any notes from streaming platforms?
I was originally making money, you know, in the early days with CD Baby, when I was selling CDs and things like that. Streaming has sort of increased the reach, but seeing the payments drop. I mean, and I'll use an embarrassing figure now, but it'll illustrate something why you have to actually look way beyond streaming as well. I haven't, because I've been focused on getting Delic up and running for the past couple of years, haven't really been doing any promotion of my own work. And it just trickles along. Got my latest update from Spotify on my plays. And I'll say that the number of plays that I've got this last month of October puts me in the top 1% of listened to artists on Spotify. I had 22 plays. This is the thing. This is what people need to know. And Hen mentioned the dark area of things that aren't listened to. The big streamers, the millions and millions and millions of streams that people hear about, you know, it's basically the top 0.5% of Spotify. And at any given moment, there's probably 17 people up there. In order to make it into the top 1%, you only have to have 14 streams in a month. So it shows you how fast it drops off from the peak all the way down. So you can't look to streaming as something that's going to make you a huge amount of money. You've got to look beyond that. You've got to look at the other things. You've got to, as we talked about, physical product, things like that. We had a conversation with an artist manager in New York just last week. He has a band who did a whole streaming series. And what they did is, it was a limited number of tickets sold. They did a performance of one of their albums. And so it was one of their albums every week, sort of from the beginning to the end, had some special visual effects associated with it and things like that. So they made it a real event. And they made $750,000 when they're streaming.
Whoa. Wow.
I mean, it helps if you've got a following.
Yeah.
But we've heard this theme from both Adam and Hen through this conversation, which is make it special.
Mm-hmm.
You know, streaming is great, but it's, you know, just utility. It's a tap.
Yeah.
Turn it on while you're cooking, turn it on while you have a dinner party or something like that. It is not a special experience.
Yeah. Okay. Adam, coming back to you and just like sort of let's move on to merchandise and subscription models and so on and so on. But I mean, how does an unknown artist, let's assume that people watching this, and let's assume that most people who make music are emerging, unknown, not yet successful artists. It's fine if a well-known artist decides to put their back catalog on a streaming platform. You know, they know it's almost guaranteed that millions of people are going to go straight there and find it. You know, Tool decided to put their back catalog up on streaming platforms recently, and then they topped all the streaming charts in the world overnight because everyone who was streaming needed to hear Tool. But unknown artists, I mean, no one has a good word to say about streaming royalties and revenues at all. And yet it seems to be the one thing that everyone's obsessed with. And it seems to be, from the user's point of view, the growth way of listening to music. How do you make money out of it?
So I think it's long-term, because we've got to keep in mind, streaming has only been commercialized for what, 7 years? And over the last 5 years, the revenue's been growing at a 43% CAGR. Goldman Sachs thinks that the recorded music industry is going to grow from where it is about 20 billion to about 80 billion by 2030. And most of that is actually going to come from streaming. So as that market and pot gets a lot bigger, I think that coupled with most likely, we're going to have to increase the prices for monthly listeners, because Netflix used to be $7.99 for streaming. It's now what, $15 in the US? So we're going to have to see things like that take place, where then artists are actually getting paid a meaningful amount per stream. And going back to what John said, it's incredible how many artists are actually on these platforms, because we're actually seeing major growth where we look at artists, there's at least 30,000 artists who have above 50,000 monthly active listeners, which is going to be about probably 200,000 streams on average, which ends up being about $1,000, which isn't great, but it's also not nothing. And there is a large population of these artists, but then there's an even bigger population that John alluded to that aren't receiving anything. So I think that we're going to have to, there's going to be a reckoning where I think there's got to be a place where artists, even just, because I've heard this, sorry, it's difficult to articulate, but where the user, if they're spending $10 a month in streaming, that just goes into a pot, which then gets dispersed to everyone, not to the actual artist that they listen to. But there's a debate about what happens if you actually start giving the money proportioned out to the artist that unique listener.
Yeah, there's all sorts of discussions going on. The Broken Record campaign is talking about this, trying to realign. If you happen to listen to John's band and my band and so on every month, we pay our Spotify sort of premium, $9.99 a month or whatever, most of that money will go to Ed Sheeran or whoever else. And I don't want those guys to pay to get any of my streaming money. I want, you know, John and I to get our just deserves. We need that £1.99 a year or whatever we're going to get. But you know, and so there is discussion about trying to change, I suppose, you know, a series of algorithms to work out, you know, when someone streams an artist, the artists themselves benefit from those listeners, even if the listening figures are relatively small. Is that correct? These kind of discussions are being had. Hen, you must know all about this as well.
Yeah, so Deezer has confirmed that they want to test it. And they're kind of in the process. I think all the major stakeholders are looking at the data right now to try to work out how it's going to affect them, because it's a little bit difficult, as John mentioned, in terms of actually knowing who owns what and where the flow of money is going. Obviously, no big company is going to say, yes, please take away a lot of my money. And it's a really interesting conversation. I keep going back and forth on that whole topic. And, you know, one of the things that potentially scares me a little bit, and I don't know if this would actually be a reality, but in my head, the sort of people that would listen to smaller, independent, emerging artists are the kind of people that listen to a lot of music, or much more than your average consumer. That means effectively, in my head, that means that, well, that sounds like you're kind of devaluing that fan, and you're increasing the value of the fan that only listens to Ed Sheeran every single month. Okay. Is that the correct thing to do? I don't know. It's really, really tricky.
So maybe having the big pot and dividing it kind of into micro fractions is the best way. Are those artists that get streamed regularly going to just make even more money than before?
Well, this is the question. There's been a lot of research done, and I think there's more research to be published relatively soon around that. But I very much agree with what Adam is saying in terms of price increases. That there hasn't really been a price increase of Spotify since launch. They've tested it in Scandinavia, and it's gone well in Scandinavia. They haven't really lost any user bases based off increasing the prices. But I think also it's worth remembering where we are sitting here in the West, that the price for these subscription services is much lower in a lot of other countries. Therefore, you know, the price per stream rate is also lower in some markets.
Yeah, well, I mean, to me, it's always felt like a bit like if this actually does happen and they just increase the prices, it's almost like some kind of dodgy drug dealer, you know, hey, have your first stuff for free, and then when you get hooked, you know, you can pay me, you know, $20 a bag or whatever it is. That seems to be what's happened. You know, annihilate the rest of the music industry so that everyone's using streaming, and it's all kind of next to nothing. In fact, I've said this to people for years, this is going to happen, and it sounds like eventually this is going to happen. So record stores are done for, even downloading becomes something that's ancient. Everyone's streaming, and then suddenly your $9.99 a month goes to $20 or $19.99 a month, who knows? But
and that's okay. The price of milk has increased in the last 5 to 10 years.
So why shouldn't it? And no, I value music, and I think music has a value. And I think if people are making music as a sort of product in a way, then people need to pay for that product. I don't believe that artists should make their work for free. And I don't actually think consumers think that either. I think most people, if they can get something for nothing or for very little, they will. Whether it's milk, whether it's, you know, rock and roll. If they don't have to pay for it and they can get it for free, they will. But if they like it, they will pay for something. So anyway, the streaming conundrum goes on. It is yet one of these revenue streams. Adam, can
I just say one more thing on that? Sorry, it's
sure, of course.
So from the report that you referenced before, the Amuse and Media report that looked at all the different revenue streams, so that an artist has to be an entrepreneur, one of the things that report points out is that roughly 40% of independent kind of DIY artists don't actually spend any money on marketing. And I think it's a very important thing to note that if you're not going to spend any money on marketing and getting your name out there, your growth is going to be a lot slower. And unfortunately, that means your streaming income is not going to grow as quickly because the people that you're competing with, they're spending a ton of money. Just
okay. Oh, right. Okay. Well, before we move on then, in terms of, because, you know, again, an emerging artist that has no cash, they're not going to be able to employ an expensive PR company. So would you have any recommendations for the kinds of marketing that a young or emerging or sort of a skint artist could pay for? What kind of stuff should they do? You know, try and hit more people, grow their Instagram numbers or social media, or do you think they should hit the press or radio, or what would you recommend?
I think a combination. Into social media, the social media platforms have made it very easy for anybody to set up advertisement campaigns. And if you're paying attention to the results of it, I think that is an easier maybe return on investment when we're talking low scale. But then also, you know, you can be clever and smart about it, and you know, find students that are studying marketing or PR that are just desperately looking for any form of experience. Tell them that you're an exciting new band and say that you have all these plans. They probably do some for free, or for low amounts of money, because we're not supporting free working.
Yeah.
But there's also a lot of these platforms like the Unsigned Guide here in the UK that has a million bits of resources in terms of how you do all these things on your own. It just requires time and effort and education.
Yeah. Adam, would you recommend anything in terms of sort of marketing, easily accessible marketing tools that people could use to try and, you know, get on people's radar a little bit more? I'm going to actually get some chat out of the box here as well. But Adam, any sort of tips for people?
Yeah, I think that social media is huge. And I'd also love to hear your perspective on paying for playlists, because I've had many different artists like ask about this, and some have had great results, lots have had bad results, because sometimes it can actually harm you in the algorithms. But I wanted to hear your perspective on that. I saw a very strong note.
Yeah, and go on.
I look at this sort of streaming data a lot of the time, and what you see is that they'll put you into a playlist with huge amounts of numbers, whether they are genuine users or whether that comes from what they call a stream farm, which is just kind of fake streams effectively. And what happens is that you go from 3 listeners a day to 40,000 in a day, and then you plummet back down to 3. Any person that works in streaming is going to look at that and call BS on it straight away, and it could actually harm you and affect, like, almost like blacklist you. So no, don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's get a couple of comments in the chat box here. Ali Demel has said, is streaming not only a place for youngsters? I'm 50, I run a band and a label, and I'm on streaming platforms, but generate next to no revenue. How do you stand out and attract people? We've just been talking about that. Do you still need the machine and industry behind you? Are the current indie bands, for example, Idols and Sleaford Mods, truly indie, or do they have PR and marketing behind them? Let's be honest here. Both of those bands, Idols and Sleaford Mods, definitely came from the underground and definitely came from the DIY scene. But nowadays, they have got a PR machine behind them, don't they, Hen?
Yeah. The Idols are signed to Partisan Records, which is one of the biggest indie labels. They have offices in the US and the UK. They have a team behind them, and PR and marketing. You know, that is a crucial part of getting to a certain level. If you're not going to spend any money on PR and marketing once you hit a certain threshold, unfortunately, you're just going to be outspent by all of your competitors.
Yeah. Okay. What we've got another one here from Chris Elsden, who says, what's in it for the curators of these playlists? What do they get out of it? What's in it? That's an interesting question. I assume most of the curators are employed.
No, there's a lot of private individuals and a lot of companies as well that curate playlists. For a lot of private individuals, they're music fans, so there's a certain satisfaction in growing their own playlist brand, right? Like an Instagram profile. It's kind of the same thing. Or for companies, that obviously provides exposure for the companies.
Okay.
I'd like to jump in quickly and just
Yeah,
make a
go for it,
comment
John.
about exposure and things like that in terms of streaming, particularly since, you know, I exposed a low number of streams on Spotify. But before the streaming services, I was doing, actually, with the assistance of archive.org, a podcast in the very, very early days of podcasts back in the mid 2000s. And I did this project where I recorded and released a new track every day for a year. And some of the tracks had as many as 500,000 listens. I was doing this for free and deliberately doing it for free. But what it did do is it got me a couple jobs scoring some independent films. So you need to look at a sort of a larger ecosystem. You can't just sort of sit back and say streaming is everything and it's going to bring in everything else. You know, if you can get a lot of streams on Spotify, you're still not going to make a lot of money necessarily until you hit that 0.5%, you know, stratosphere. But you can still use it as a promotional tool to promote your live stream performances, to promote your work for synchronization, to promote your limited edition vinyl sale and things like that.
Well, I'm fascinated by the PR conversation as well, because I don't think people really think about this enough, is that everyone's releasing music, but how do you stand out from the bunch? You need to try and get some kind of PR behind you. Now, whether that's a major PR company or, as Hen was sort of saying, you know, social media and sort of getting friends to help you out and so on and so on. Let's move on, because we could talk for hours on streaming alone. I'm interested to talk about some of the other kind of finance models. And Adam, you're an expert in this. So let's know, I mean, people will be aware of crowdfunding, GoFundMe and these kind of things, and previous, before it's collapsed, Pledge Music and so on. Crowdfunding plays a huge part in a young band's career, I would imagine, and even an established band's career, but also subscription models like Patreon and so on. Can you talk us through that field?
Yeah, absolutely. So Pledge Music and that collapse is one of the reasons that I built Amplify, because I thought it was incredible what they were doing, but they weren't finance people. They didn't set it up correctly, because they ended up using investor or donations for their own operating expenses. Something like that would never happen at Amplify, because I set it up where I have a banking partner that holds all the cash in an escrow account that until it gets distributed to the artist. So we never end up touching that cash. In addition, instead of it being a donation where maybe you get a CD, maybe you get a t-shirt, we actually changed it into an investment model where if this artist ends up blowing up, you have a right to the piece of those royalties, where the artist maintains full ownership of their masters, but then it's a revenue share product that then allows their fans to participate. Where what you guys have over in Europe with soccer bonds, where the hedonic value is so strong that over 50% of German soccer bonds are never turned in, and they sit above fireplaces because people love to show that they supported and cared about their favorite players and teams and different things like that. So I think that the hedonic value and investment is a really interesting space, and so is fractional ownership, where we're seeing it with classic cars, with fine arts, with all these different new types of assets, especially with bonds at record lows. And then in terms of other types of subscription models like Patreon, I think those are phenomenal, because those are small monthly donations, but those can add up to a very significant amount. Because think about, if somebody's even donating $2 a month to you, how many streams is that? Depending on platform, that's like 400 streams.
If I can just jump in quickly, Patron, I know an artist, I won't name them, but I know an artist based in Scotland. Again, when lockdown hit and the whole pandemic kicked in, everyone was scratching their heads and sort of flailing around and wondering how to make any kind of money. This artist set up a Patreon and started doing unique fairly lo-fi streams and doing special events and, you know, selling merch and having conversations with fans and so on. But it was, you know, again, donate what you like, and you get, the more you donate, the better the service you get and so on. And that person, as I say, I don't want to mention their name in case things have changed or whatever, or I may be misquoting, but I heard that that person was earning about £1,000 a month. That's a single artist, not a band, a single artist, just using Patreon. So that's not using streaming services or Bandcamp or anything else. So through that one platform. I mean, they were slightly more established, so they weren't utterly new. They weren't just fresh out of the blocks. So they had a little following, but they're by no means a world-renowned artist. But they were earning £1,000 a month just from Patreon. If you please, like, just using that as an example, continue, Adam. Tell us more about the sort of subscription.
Yeah, incredible. Think of how many streams they would need to get to generate £1,000 a month. And I think you'd be the best person to answer that question, but I'm assuming it's hundreds of thousands.
So you know, in terms of like publishing deals of old, when a publishing company, of course, there are many, you know, hugely successful publishing companies continuing to work. In fact, there are thousands of less successful ones, millions of them around the world. But in a way, is AmplifyX, are you in a way like allowing people to crowdfund someone's publishing in a way? Is that how it works?
It's similar. So we actually work a little bit, at least for the MVP, for the next first couple of artists, we're doing a little bit more off the revenue of the masters, because that is the majority of the revenue, especially in a streaming economy. And we see that huge growth, and this being just the beginning. So we want to be able to capture those long tails, because when you think of, because most, like over in the UK, you guys have Hypnosis, where Merck is acquiring billions of dollars of catalogs, but I don't see really anybody playing on that emerging side of talents, where you're betting a little bit earlier on their careers. It's more risky, but then also the potential returns are higher. In addition, the revenue multiples that we're going to be valuing these artists at will be less, so it will be a much safer investment than what some of the competitors we've seen out there do.
Well, I know you don't want to necessarily talk about your own competitors, but what other platforms out there are there for people to look at for these kinds of, you know, investment models?
So I think what lots of the different distribution players are doing, like Cobalt and Scale by STEM and United Masters, where they have tools where you can actually get advances on your streaming royalties. And it's similar to a debt instrument, where you basically say, let's say you're making $5,000 a month, they'll allow you to take 6 months out, if then you do give them a 50% rev share for the next year. And I think different models like this, just to give artists the budget to be able to market properly, like Hen was talking about, is so important, because not enough artists do market. And marketing is how you actually get exposure, which then turns into revenue long-term.
Hen, are there other sort of models that you have to deal with CD Baby, or even as your role as an advisor to an artist that you work with, that you would point people towards? I mean, for example, Bandcamp has really come into its own in lockdown, I think, and throughout the pandemic. And one of their big success stories is Bandcamp Friday. Once a month, they drop their percentage. And there's a lot of goodwill from Bandcamp. I don't see any bands or artists slagging off Bandcamp. I see them all slagging off Spotify. So it's done them as a platform some good as well. But would you point people towards them, and who else?
100% Bandcamp. Absolutely love them. They have done so much, so many positive things for the independent community since this lockdown happened. So definitely, and like you said, it's the first Friday of every single month. They don't charge a commission on any of the sales. So if you really point your fans towards their site on that specific day, you know, you can have a good return on your sales. I think picking up on what you were saying in terms of publishing, I think that's one of those kind of historically really high barrier of entry, because there was a lot of investment involved. You would get a big advance. The deals were pretty big and extensive. And I think that's one of the areas of the music industry that's also been kind of revolutionized in the last period of time with companies like Song Trust, where it's a publishing administrator and they take a much lower percentage of your income. So like a 15% flat fee, for instance, but they collect all of your publishing income, which previously, especially for independent artists and emerging artists, has been left on the table. So when we talk to when I talk to artists, I normally explain it. It's like, it's roughly an extra 25p for every pound that you're making on streaming services. Not a bunch of money, but it's still definitely something that you should make sure that you're collecting properly.
So are these, sorry, just to jump in, are these royalties from PRS, MCPS, PPL, these royalty collections, royalty agencies?
Yeah, exactly. And then also, I think making sure that you're tapping into all the possible avenues. Like we as a distributor, we have a sync department, which not all of our competitors have, right? But making sure that when you're picking your industry partners, that they have as many possible avenues for you to collect money on. You know, we represent a huge catalog. So music supervisors know they can come to us and they can say, hey, I want something really obscure or really contemporary, whatever it might be, and we'll likely have it, you know. The sync is obviously huge, you know, being able to get your tracks onto advertisements or films and TV, all these things. And that's definitely also something that's possible for independent artists.
Well, I'd like to go to some of the questions in the Q&A, because I think they will cover some of the things that we're talking about right now, and also just take us into a couple of new areas as well. An anonymous attendee has said, income stream wise, what about computer games? That market is much larger than the music market and every game has music in it. Are there any services out there pairing creators with games creators? That's interesting. That's a great question. Adam, do you know anything about that?
To be honest, I do not.
Hen?
Yeah, so our sister company, Fuga, which is a label services company, they have a deal with a big company called Riot Games, which I think is based in LA. And they're responsible for instance, League of Legends, which is one of the huge online games. And, you know, they work with creators. They might not necessarily put out the music as the creator themselves. They create avatars and all these different things, but like this music is streaming in the millions, like insane numbers. Obviously there's been a few big PR stories with like Travis Scott doing the Fortnite thing, but you need to be Travis Scott to be able to get those deals. But all the gaming companies will have their in-house music creators, so they will work with music creators to create the background music for their games. Definitely.
So I suppose it's, in a way, it's a bit like what we describe as sync. So synchronizing your music. It could be synchronizing music to TV, to film, to advertising, whether it be online advertising or TV advertising or whatever, and also synchronizing your music to scenes in a game, in a video game. Do you really need an agent, a sync agent, or someone operating on your behalf to get you that kind of work? Because everyone wants, I mean, some people don't want their music in an advert, but people who are hard up financially would kill to have a large sync deal with a TV advert or a film soundtrack or something. How do people go about that? I know we don't have the time to go into every specific detail, but is it right to have an agent or someone to help you along?
So you don't need to have an agent, but music supervisors are the people that work with big TV networks, for instance, and they'll go out to different sync departments within companies. So for instance, within CD Baby, and they'll bring a brief and they'll say, hey, we are doing an advert for Volkswagen. We want it to sound like a Parisian 1960s, whatever. Have you got anything that fits within this? People get to pitch for it, and then they pick what they want and agree on the price. It's much easier when it's a very easily clearable track, so that you're clear on who owns the master side of the recording and who owns the composer side. Because if you can clear both sides of it pretty quickly, that makes it easier for your sync department. But there's a million different sync companies that you can sign up to on a non-exclusive basis, meaning you can work with a lot of different ones.
Yeah.
That's
Okay. That Tom Armstrong has asked a question in the chat room as well, in the Q&A room, saying, aside from selling your music to fans, what other avenues could you explore to generate a revenue for your music? John mentioned film scores, for example. How would you get your track featured in an advert? We've covered that. I mean, film scores is yet another way of or composing for content made by other people. But I suppose that, again, at a grassroots level, you're just kind of trying to find content creators and hook up with them. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, it's because there's the two different things. There is getting your work synced. There is working with any of the number of library music companies. So you kind of create generic mood music that you can then get paid for. I get about $32 a year from Microsoft. I'm not sure what they used something of mine for, but I get a royalty check for that amount. And then there are the direct commissions, and the things that I did came through this podcast of new work that I did. And it was, a couple independent filmmakers and video art makers. There are people in film school. There's a composer who went to, Columbia University with the Coen brothers. And then he just ended up scoring all of their films. So part of that is particularly with, the more indie or artistic filmmakers, is establishing a long-standing relationship. It's like Angelo Badalamenti and David Lynch, so look at, film students and talk to them about, working with them for something.
I'm a great believer in approaching, if you know someone that makes great art, then and you think it fits well with your music, then go up to them and approach them and say, would you marry your art to our music? Would you do posters for us, or would you do graphic design for us, or whatever? Same with filmmakers. We want some kind of visual content for our new release. Would you make a film for us? It's a sort of mutually beneficial world as well. If you're both emerging, if you're both kind of unknown artists, then why not? I think forging those kinds of relationships early on is a great way to have a fruitful career together in a way. Let's go to another question in the Q&A box. Roberta Fedora has said, where do you see newer listening platforms such as AmpLed, a co-op alternative to Patreon, Resonate, cooperative streaming, Sunstream, and Currents.fm fitting into the current landscape? Adam, I think that's maybe one for you.
To be honest, I don't think I'm familiar with any of those companies.
Okay, well, Hen, it's for you then. Do you know those companies, AmpLed, Resonate, Sunstream, or Currents FM?
No, I don't think I do. And I think that's kind of people have platform fatigue. There's so many different platforms out there that you can work with. I think for any artist, it's just about finding what works for you and where you think that you'll be able to find an audience to connect with, be that Spotify or Current FM or TikTok, or whatever it might be.
Yeah. John, are you aware of any? Have you got any opinions on those?
I mean, it's a difficult thing for any streaming company because there's very little to differentiate them. There aren't really exclusives. People still want it to be a bit like the radio, even if they're young and they haven't listened to radio. They don't want to have to hop around from platform to platform. They just want to turn on the one thing, and not channel hop or whatever. So it's really difficult to distinguish yourself. I mean, Spotify has found that, as well. They don't have that much to distinguish themselves as far as the content goes, except now they're moving into podcasts and things like that. There's a whole other element about not wanting to pay royalties, but that's a whole other side of things. But what Spotify has distinguished itself is user friendliness and ease of execution. Musicians complain about them, but you know what? As a listener, they make a really good product. I mean, it works. It works really well. I've got my Amazon Echo Dot hooked up to, music. I pop it up on my phone, and I can then, what I'm listening to now, I'm walking out the door. I'm going to put it on my phone and listen to it. And it's seamless. I'm downstairs in my house and I say, Alexa, play this on the bedroom. And all of a sudden it's moved over there. And that's actually because of Spotify's API efforts and efforts to integrate something. And they've actually made something that is really good for, listeners.
Yeah, sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say, it's that curation thing that you're talking about right there. That it's almost like creating radio in a digital world, a radio experience for listeners, where they trust that they can just put on a playlist, for instance, which is one of the reasons playlists have become such a focus point. They can just put on a playlist and listen to it and enjoy that experience because they know it's been done well,
Yeah, although as someone that works in radio, as I see Spotify's new feature, which is basically make radio programs, it's like they already exist, but the more radio programs out there, the better, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, just to kind of sum up, and maybe to get a few more points from you individually, in terms of going back to what we're discussing, how do music makers and musicians make money? You need this portfolio of work. You need streaming. It would be ridiculous to be a musician in the modern world who has any kind of ambition and not be on streaming platforms. So you have to be there. You have to have your music available to download. You probably should have some physical product as well, vinyl, CD, or both, possibly limited edition cassettes. There are people who love cassettes, even if it's just the ownership of it. You probably need merchandise, which we haven't talked a lot about apart from physical copies of music, but t-shirts and cups and underpants and all that sort of stuff. You need, you probably need, if you're serious about making some cash, you need a line of merch. You should try and activate some kind of synchronization. If you can try and get your music to filmmakers or TV, I mean, it's easier said than done. Everyone's trying to do this, and there's 43,000 songs released every day to streaming platforms. But one thing that I keep hearing from all of you is make it special. Make it special. Make the experience special. Now, as someone that's worked in music and in radio and talked to young artists for over 20 years, when people say, what should we do to try and stand out from the gang? I'm like, make your music stand out from the gang. If you sound like everyone else, if you sound bland and generic, some people will love that. But the chances are that you won't find an audience because people want something special. Make the experience special. Make your pay-per-view streaming thing special. And another thing that I seem to hear from all of you is PR as well. So it's make the product unique or as unique as you can, and then get it out there, but using ingenious methods. Is that sort of where we're coming from, do you think, Hen?
Definitely. And I think lean on your industry partners. Like you're likely paying your industry partners a commission, and you're paying them that for a reason. Ask what more you should be doing, whether you're running a label, you're managing an artist, or you are an artist yourself. They should be able to help you and guide you in the right direction. And I think just super quickly on merch, if you want to learn, or if you want to be inspired by amazing merch, look at K-pop, J-pop, and metal. Metal are the most amazing sector of the industry when it comes to merch. They sell stuff for that like £600 a pop. It's amazing.
Yeah. Philip Dawson had just put a comment in the Q&A box saying eco-friendly merch and physical formats. That's a good point to make as well. We don't necessarily want to fill the world with more, created plastics that can't be, biodegradable and so on. Adam, do you want to say anything as we sort of wind this up as well?
Yeah, I think you summed it up perfectly. Just making sure that you're unique. And I think what Hen said about metal is so important because we're seeing metal blend with hip hop now. And with people like Ghostman, who sells hoodies for $1,600 and sells out in the first day. And then his live shows are so unique where he has fire breathers on stage and different, like anything that you can do to make that cult-like following that will do anything for you to support you, I think is what is going to make you successful in the long term.
Yeah. And as this is a Delic session, John, maybe tell us how Delic is helping people who sign up to the platform and start using the platform, how it can point you towards these kind of ways of making money. I mean, how can Delic sort of help the artist?
Well, there's a range of things that we're doing. One of the things that we rolled out first, actually, when the first lockdown came out, was making it possible for our members to create a public page and host live streams on that public page. And also with a little donation button, because certain streaming video companies, maybe I don't want to name names, but when they said live music industry is falling apart, come and do live streams on our platform and we'll make all the money. We allow people to bring in a little money in that direction. We're moving things a bit further so that pretty soon, as a matter of fact, this coming month, you're going to be able to take preview tracks, as it were, rough mixes, stems, and things like that, and share them with people who are on the platform, almost on a one-to-one basis. So you can send it to somebody and say, here's the rough mix, take a listen, let me know what you think, comments like that. So it's about engaging people in the process. That's one of the great things about something like Patreon, is you can expose to your true fans the development process. The other aspect is, as you work on Delic, you're going to be creating, we house all of your media assets. So rough mixes, as I said, instrumentals, original backing tracks, alternate mixes, and things like that. We are going to be rolling out a marketplace where you can make those available for purchase, for reuse by other people on the platform. So it's reused by people or even make it, sample clearinghouse. And this isn't going to be as if you're making library music, which can tend to be a little bit bland because you're not sure what use it's going to be put to. It's like, here's alternative stuff, do remixes. It's about pulling people in, making things special. Admittedly, these are people who have a big following, but you look at the latest release from, the reissue of Sign of the Times from Prince. It's all, what is it? It's like 10 different CDs and multiple sorts of things. People want to dive into that. Your true fans, who are actually the ones who are going to spend the most money on you, are going to dive into that. And Delic is making it possible to make those things available.
Great. I've just noticed in the chat box, anyone who's watching who wanted to know about Ampled or Resonate, that Ed's put the web addresses there. And very quickly, Hen, tell us a little bit about what CD Baby is doing over the next kind of few weeks, months, years. What's the next move for you? How are things developing?
Really, really well. We've remained very healthy throughout the lockdown period, and I see no reason why we wouldn't continue to do so. We are trying to become a family of company that can support an independent artist from grassroots level up to superstar level, and we have sister companies within the same group so that we can follow an artist's journey. So anything anything related to that, get in touch.
So if someone got in touch with CD Baby, they're going to potentially have the access to these sister companies.
Absolutely. And everything from distribution to publishing to sync to digital marketing tools and everything that's necessary, really, except for ticketing.
Right. Okay. That's great. And Adam, AmplifyX, where are you with that, and how are things going, and what's the future?
Yeah, things are going great. So we just received our FINRA membership and registered with the SEC. So now are able to sell securities. And we have our beta with our first 2 artists kicking off next week, where if you want to check it out, go over to AmplifyX.com.
Great.
By next week, it should be up.
Well, it's a pleasure having you all here, and thank you to everyone who's watched as well. I'd like to say, if you have any more in-depth questions that you want to get to any of our panelists or to Delic itself, it's hello@delic.network. So that's hello@delic.network. You can use the hashtag make some noise. Go and check out Delic. Go and check out CD Baby, AmplifyX. Go and check out my band Check Masses. Go and check out my BBC shows. Check everything out, but only the good stuff, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll speak to you in 2 weeks for Delic session number 7. Thank you to Delic for having us, and thank you to all my panelists. Have a great evening, or whatever